Welcome to the Daily Devo. My name's Joel, and today we're talking about the commands God gives us. We're continuing in this series talking about 10 questions God asks in the Old Testament, and today's passage comes from Genesis chapter 3, and we'll pick up in the second part of verse 11. It says this: "Have you eaten from the tree whose fruit I commanded you not to eat?" One thing you should know about me, I have a major sweet tooth. I enjoy all kinds of sweets, treats, candies, ice creams, all of it. This is something that started when I was a little kid, and I'm sure my parents hoped I would outgrow it someday, but I'm happy to report it stayed the same. I even would go so far as to call myself a candy connoisseur. I remember back to being a kid, and there would be times where I would get a lot of candy, maybe for a birthday celebration or around Halloween time, and my parents would always say, "Joel, don't eat all the candy at once." When I heard my parents say this, my assumption was that they were just trying to limit the joy in my life. Like they wanted to rip me off and withhold a good thing from me. So on occasion, I would refuse to listen to them and I'd eat way more candy than any one person should. The result would always be catastrophic, with a stomachache that legitimately felt like it was going to be the end of me. When this happened, I was reminded that rebellion always comes with repercussions, and that my parents' commands were really there to protect me, not to rip me off. The reason I start here today is because the verse we just read in Genesis chapter 3 shows us the moments after Adam and Eve committed the first sin, eating the fruit from the tree that God had commanded them not to eat from. The verses prior to this paint a picture of Satan tempting them by calling into question what God really said and what his heart for them really was. And for just a moment, Adam and Eve believed that God's commands were there to rip them off, not for their good. So when God comes to ask them this question, we see Adam and Eve sitting in their sin and their shame, the same way I would when my parents asked me if I had not listened to what they said and had eaten too much candy. The reality is that rebellion always comes with repercussions. And oftentimes it's in the middle of those repercussions that we realize God's commands are actually in place to protect us, not to withhold good things from us. So here's the question I want us to reflect on today. In what area of your life are you believing that God's commands are designed to rip you off? Maybe you look at God's commands for sex and purity, and you believe that he doesn't have your best interest in mind, so you're choosing to rebel. Maybe you think his command to be generous with your finances is because he wants you to struggle, so you're rebelling by keeping your money for yourself. Maybe you're convinced that his command to love your neighbor as yourself is there just to torture you, and so you haven't stepped into obedience in this area. What area of your life are you believing the lie that God is trying to rip you off? And what if today was the day that you started to believe that even God's commands that are difficult are in place for your good? What if you took him at his word and believed that he is for you, even in the things that he asks you to refrain from? My encouragement today is to identify the places we've lost sight of this, to ask God to remind us of his goodness to us in all circumstances.